possible gridlock. You hear that word all the time, and I'm like, I hate hearing people say that. Gridlock, gridlock, gridlock. Gridlock is a bad thing. It slows down policy, and thus it slows down the intelligence, the functioning to some extent of the intelligence community, right? It really does. In terms of at least trend detection and threat assessment, effective trend detection and threat assessment. So very, very important. Good theory should transcend the trivialities of partisan politics. I mean, highlight that, underline it, eat it. Because good theory isn't created, it is discovered and based in evidence and fact. Right? Good theory has to be based in evidence and fact. We don't pull this out of nowhere. And if the evidence is showing by a community of, and this is what we need now, right? You can't really fault divided partisan politics anywhere. Well, I can't really speak for other places in the world because I'm not that well informed, but inside the U.S., pretty divided. However, there's some justification. We're a very, very, very young nation, extremely young nation. You think about civilizations that have been around for millennia. We're extremely young. We're not even a baby yet. We're still in development phase. We haven't left the womb yet, right? And the idea is there really hasn't been, in terms of security-based, national intelligence, security-based theoretical analysis that has been constructed specifically for this community and solely for this community. There's been a lot of hybridization and borrowing of other disciplines. There's been a lot taken from IR. There's been a lot taken from conflict resolution. There's been a lot taken from humanitarianism and such, right? But the idea is, or just proper sort of military history. But the idea is national security proper is really a consolidation of all of those, theoretically speaking, a consolidation of all of those security-based discourses, theoretical approaches to the security-based discourse. And what national intelligence does that it doesn't do is that it has to, it's called national intelligence. It has to fundamentally integrate the national ideology that governs, that makes your nation your nation. That has to be inextricably bound to, it has to be fused with how you go about security, national, both domestically and internationally, right? So there's a huge ideological, huge theoretical component in national security because the concept of nation presupposes ideological conformity. It presupposes it. You're not going to have national identification without governing ideology. You're not. It doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. You can be a private company, sure. You have a little mission statement, you know, put a pamphlet together, and you can talk about security in that regard. But when you're talking about the nation, what does that mean, right? So, I mean, a really good discussion would begin, theoretically speaking. I got a little off tangent, but I think this is important for those who will be writing in the field and studying in the field. It is really important to understand what you mean. I know what it means, but it's important to understand what you mean when you use the word national. Aside from national security, security is not too hard to define, intelligence is not too hard to define. National is very hard to define. You should clearly understand what it means to be national, because to be national is not the aggregation of people. It is not having governance. None of that makes things national, right? To be national is, and the poli-sci folks have the sort of this discourse locked. This is what they do. So there's no need reinventing the wheel. Go to poli-sci, see how they define national, incorporate it directly or hybridize it a bit so that you can facilitate a discourse on security and securing the national. But I guarantee you this from a theoretical standpoint, as we saw in Gill's, I think we're still in Gill's analysis, as we saw in Gill's analysis 2 days ago maybe, there was I introduced the subdivision between practical application and theoretical application. Practical application of national security, not hard to do at all. Theoretical application of national security, a bit more difficult, because in identifying what we mean by national, you have to secure the idea of the nation. It's not just about guns and bullets. It's not. And I'm not going to lecture on this more publicly because it's a little bit too candy rich. I'm going to keep some of that for myself because I'm an evil, selfish bastard. But, you know, the practical application is one thing. The theoretical application, there needs to be, I'll just give this much, and I think it should be more than enough to sort of tip off where I'm going. But there needs to be logical, systemic, ideological, defensive strategies, approaches to defending the concept, the idea of the nation, right? Because in a sense, that's what the nation is. It's an idea, right? So there, when we're talking about security, we're not just talking about securing sort of geospatial, infrastructural, sort of persons-based localities. We're talking about securing the idea of the nation. And that's a much, much more difficult thing to do. And very few people have formally discussed that. how that is done, how that process unfolds. All of this in due time. When I sit down to actually write, I'll be introducing this sort of this discourse. Okay. So quote, we must also develop speculative hypotheses that can be tested against the evidence, right? Sort of good science. We have to develop speculative hypotheses that can be tested against the evidence. The speculation part, the conceptualization part, is what is proposed, and then that proposition is taken into the field and tested. Is it actually true? Sure. I mean, this is how sort of, when we're talking about just strictly, and this is a good point. This is it's impossible to deny this. If we're talking about security measures and security metrics properly in the application of security, what you do is you do some R&D, you take the thing into the field, you test the thing to see if does this thing hold well in water, does it hold well in sand, is it good in mud, you test it, you take the findings back, and the findings are going to have you change the assumptions, change the conceptualization, change what you speculated, right? Oh, I presupposed X because when it was in the field and we were doing research, Y happened. So nothing new here. Why is it the case that people think that doesn't work theoretically? People don't think that there is a theoretical, and this really annoys me as an academic and as a theorist. There are mechanisms of testing theory in the world. It's called logic. You said this. You said that. People say, well, you can't test what someone says in the world unless there's some... No, you can absolutely test what someone said. If they said this and they said that, there has to be a coherence between the two things that they said. The way that you test theory is by applying that theory to logic. You say, well, is what you're saying actually rational? It sounds rational. Truisms don't default to reason, right? Truisms, you just get up there, oh yeah, we all need to be united in times of great, tribulation. You always have to say trials and tribulations. You can't just say tribulation. It's like Trinidad and Tobago. You can't just talk about Tobago, right? You have to talk about Trinidad and Tobago. So when people talk about trials, it's always trials and tribulations. So it's one of those truisms, right? It's sort of, we all have to find unity in times of trials and tribulations. Okay, great. What does that mean? Does that mean we only do that when we're under attack? Does it mean it's only important when there's an external threat? Does that mean every other time we can argue and bicker and be decisive and never come to any resolution at all? Oh, okay, well, I don't know. It seems sort of hokey that you guys are now... You know what it seems like to me? It seems like, and I'm not saying anybody specifically, but the way I would interpret it as a predator is, it seems like a sign of weakness. Of course you're going to be consolidated. Of course you want to be grouped together. You should be grouped together because you're shook. Because you're scared. That's what scared people do, right? The aggressor comes in, fuck shit up. Pardon my French. But the aggressor comes in, fuck shit up, and of course you huddle in the corner. Because that's what weak people do. Weak people huddle in the corner when the aggressor comes. Of course you come. Is that what you're really saying? Is that what you're really saying? That's what it sounds like to me. That's what it sounds like to me. Right? And the reason would justify that my interpretation is sort of valid. The way that you make sure that that is not the interpretation. Oh, wow, that could potentially be the interpretation, and you might get it twisted. I'm getting a little ghetto here. Just so that you recognize, no, not only do we huddle in times of external threat, we'll get together and plan for you to try us when we huddle in external threat. I'm done talking. It's too early in the morning to be doing lectures this deep. But I mean, I love this. I love this stuff because it's the practical implication, the practical application. It's so practical. Like philosophy, not as practical as I'd liked. Conflict resolution, generally a little bit more practical. Genocide stuff that I wrote on, I thought was very practical. National security affairs, it's like from your brain to the world. It's like there's no filter. It's just let's test it right now. Let's see if it works right now. Theoretically, I want to say that theoretically we need to be able to do that as well, right? Let's test your ideas right now. Let's not wait. You said this, you said this. You're saying this, the context with which your speech is framed is within the paradigm of national security. Let's test what you said, your rhetorical, the meaning of your rhetoric. Let's test the meaning. And politicians the world over do this all the time. And it's